What's up guys, it's Brad from Light Architect here. Today I'm going to be showing you how you can create this cool building explosion utilizing the KHAOS add-on inside of Blender. We didn't use any mesh deformation or rigid body simulation in this specific example, but I will be showing you how to add the concrete debris as well as of course the fire explosion. Anyways guys, let's get started. Here we are inside of Blender. The first thing we are going to do is of course delete everything in our scene here. Now we will go ahead and add a ground plane to our scene. We'll use the collision objects just so that our smoke and particles will interact with it in case they come close to it. So I'll go ahead and add a collision cube. I'll scale it down on the Z-axis, then scale it up and have something like this. And now you can use any building you want, but for this video we will be using our City Builder 3D asset pack, and we'll just go here and we'll go down to the derelict future assets. And we'll just go down here and we'll choose derelict future medium 2. And this will be the building that we blow up utilizing the KHAOS add-on. Let's go ahead and change our rendering engine to cycles. And as you can see, if we go here to rendered view, our building is already textured and ready to go. So we can simply just add our explosion wherever we want it. Alright, so now let's go ahead and let's add our particle system through the KHAOS add-on. So we'll just go to the KHAOS tab here, and we'll go ahead and go to a frame where we want the explosion to start, probably around frame 30. And then we'll just move our 3D cursor to where we want the explosion to start from, so probably around here. And we'll just select kind of the side of the building here. And then we're going to be using the dynamic smoke fire checkbox here. So go ahead and select that. And then we're going to be adding the concrete particles later. So for now, we'll just leave it like this. And then we'll go ahead and adjust a few of the particle parameters here. We'll leave most of these at their default. So 1 across the board, except for the particle start size at 2 and the smoke velocity initial and ending velocity at 0.25. And then we'll just go ahead and select the omnidirectional burst operator here. And now as you can see here, we have our omnidirectional burst in the middle, as well as a custom domain cube for our explosion that KHAOS has imported into our scene. And now what we will do is we will rescale some of these objects to customize the explosion a little bit more. So we'll go ahead and scale down our omnidirectional burst here in the middle, and we'll just move it out a little bit. And let's go ahead and play through our timeline here to see what we're getting so far. And as you can see, our particle explosion is a little bit too big for the explosion we are going for. So what we're going to do to solve this is we're just going to scale everything in our scene upwards so that in relative scale the particle explosion will be smaller. So we'll go ahead and press B, select everything, and we'll just scale it up. And there are other ways to do this as well, but just to be quick, I think this will be the best option for us. Let's see what we have here. Something like this is a little bit better, but we might still change it a little bit. We'll go ahead and select our omnidirectional burst here. We'll go ahead and scale it down a little bit so it's a little bit smaller. And we'll just put it right where we want it to explode on the side of our building here. And we'll go to the particle tab here, and we'll decrease the lifetime of this particle system to 3. And we'll change the end frame of where the particles are released to something like 34. And we'll also increase the lifetime randomness and see what we're getting so far. This is looking pretty good. I feel like to get a little bit more of a gasoline style look versus a fire particle explosion, we might increase the number of particles here. So we'll go to the number and we'll change this to 850. And now if we scroll through it, we get something like this, which is looking pretty cool. We might actually just select everything once more and then just scale it up again a little bit, just so that explosion is a little bit smaller in relative comparison to the building size, something like that. And this is looking pretty good, but one thing we might do is increase the smoke domain size so that it surrounds our smoke a little bit better in case our smoke moves a bit. So let's go ahead and select it, and we'll just scale it up a little bit. And since our explosion is going off to the left side, we'll bring it over a little bit. Alright, so something like this should be pretty good. We'll go ahead and view it in wireframe mode. As you can see, we have some of the particles going inside the building here. So one thing we might do is make our building interact with the particles so that they don't do that. So we'll just select our building, and then we'll go to the physics properties here. Go ahead and select the fluid option here. Then we'll go to type, effector, and then just leave it as collision. And then we'll go ahead and select the collision property as well. And now when our particles explode, they will stay on the outside of it because the building now interacts with the particles and won't let them go inside. Alright, so this is looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and prepare our project file so that we can do a test bake of our explosion before we bake it with high resolution. So we'll go ahead and first save our project. We'll go to File, Save As, and then we'll just save it here under Building Explosion Tutorial. And now before we do our test bake, we'll go ahead and select our smoke domain, and we'll change a few of our domain settings. We'll increase the resolution divisions. This is kind of changes the scale or look of your explosion, and we'll increase this to something like 310. And then we'll go down here, we'll change the buoyancy of the smoke a little bit. We'll change it to 0.15 so that it just goes up a little bit. The default KHAOS settings are so that the smoke doesn't move very much, but we want it to burn off going upwards a little bit. So we'll just increase both the buoyancy density and the heat value. Then we'll also select the dissolve option here. And this is going to essentially make our smoke dissolve over the course of time, but we want to increase this time value so that it takes longer for the smoke to disappear in a more natural way. So we'll increase this number to something like 300. And then under the fire option here, so that our fuel field burns off a little bit slower, we'll go ahead and change the reaction speed to something like 0.24. And that will just let our gasoline burn a little bit slower and not burn off too suddenly. Alright, so this is looking pretty good here. Under the cache option, we'll go ahead and change the end frame of our simulation to something around 130, just so we have about 4 frames of our explosion, since our explosion is starting at frame 30. And then we'll also go and change where we're saving our smoke data cache. So we'll go ahead and select this, and we'll go to our project file here and make a new folder called Building Smoke Cache. And we'll just select that folder and accept. And now this is looking pretty good. We'll go ahead and press File, Save, just one more time before we bake our data. And finally, we'll go ahead and just press Bake Data, and then give your computer some time to bake this base simulation. Alright guys, so we are back, and this is our initial explosion result here, and it's looking pretty cool. I like the general shape of the explosion, but one of the best ways to preview your explosion in real time in order to make sure you got what you want is through the OpenGL Render Active Viewport option. So what we're going to do is we're just going to find a angle that we want to render out the explosion in preview mode in real time, so probably something like around here, and then we'll just go and click on View and then Viewport Render Animation option. Before we do it as well, we'll also change our end frame to around 140. Then we'll just go to View and a Viewport Render Animation, and then give your computer some time to go through all the frames in preview mode. And then what we're going to do is we're going to play back this preview in real time so that we can see how our explosion mesh is looking, to make sure we want to bake our high resolution noise on top of it. This will take a minute or two, but it's definitely worth it to get an idea of what your explosion is going to look like. Alright, so to view our preview animation, all you have to do is just go to Render and then View Animation here. And then as you can see, a little window will come up and it will play back our explosion in real time here. And I don't know why it switches angle at the end there, but yeah, this is what we got. As you can see, it's looking pretty good. I think the timing is pretty nice. I'm not a big fan of some of these wisps on the outside, so what I might do to change that is just either increase the number of particles so the particles bring everything together a little bit better, or I might decrease the domain resolution so that the individual particles blasting out don't create as much of those kind of ink drop effects. But I think this is looking pretty good. Once we bake some high resolution noise on top of it, I think we're going to have a pretty cool result. So let's go ahead and close it here. And now we'll just go ahead and select our domain cube here, and we'll just go to the physics tab again. And now when we go down to the noise section here, this is where we can add that high resolution noise to break up the fire and flames and give it a little bit of that high resolution detail. So we'll go ahead and check this. Depending on how close you're going to use your explosion, you may want to increase this up-res factor to 3 or 4 even, if it's a really close-up shot. But since this is more of a distant explosion like you saw in the example video at the beginning of this tutorial, we'll probably just leave it at 2. And then what we'll do here is we have several settings that I usually use at their default, but we might play around with a few of these. We'll leave the time the same. We might increase this scale a little bit for some more angles in our vertices of the noise. So maybe we'll change this to something like 3. We'll also increase the strength here as well to something like 2, since we want to really create some more noise on that original base mesh to break it up a little bit. Normally I just leave these at their default, but we're just going to experiment a little bit with the strength and scale settings this time and see what we get. So now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and save our project one more time before we bake our high resolution noise, just in case something happens. And then finally we'll just go here and we'll press Bake Noise. And then once again, give your computer some time to bake the high resolution noise on the original base mesh. Alright guys, so we are back and we have baked our high resolution noise on top of our original base mesh. And it's looking pretty cool here. As you can see, there's some pretty nice detail that we've added with that noise. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set up a few render settings and do a little test render after adjusting our smoke domain material to get a better looking result. So first let's go ahead and go to our environment panel here. And we'll just add a sky environment here, just so we have a little bit of ambient lighting. And then we'll also go to the camera tab here and we'll change the sampling to somewhere around, we'll try 28 for our test render. Then we'll go to the light paths here and we'll change the volume bounces to 4, just so our light bounces around our smoke a little bit more. Then we'll go under volumes, we'll change the step size to 0.05, and then we'll change the maximum steps to around 260 or 270. These are pretty good settings for rendering smoke most of the time. Under the film tab, we'll just check this transparent box here, just so we have an alpha channel in our background and we can add our background to whatever we want. Alright, so now let's add a few lights to our scene as well as a camera. So we'll just go ahead and press Shift A and we'll add a camera. And we'll just kind of pull our camera back a little bit here just to get a little side angle of our building. We'll just viewpoint camera so we can see what we're looking at. We'll go ahead and select the camera and we'll just rotate our camera to an angle that we want. We'll just do like a low angle like you saw in the example video. Something like this should look pretty good. And then we'll go ahead and go to our camera tab here and we'll change the focal length of the camera to something like 40, so it's just a little bit wider. Alright, so this will be pretty good for our explosion. And now let's go ahead and add a light to our scene. So we'll just press Shift A and we will add a area light. We'll just create this as a backlight to our explosion. So we'll scale it up a little bit and we'll just rotate it toward our smoke a little bit. And then we'll just give it a little edge with respect of where our camera is. And then we'll increase the power of this to something like 10,000. And then we will duplicate it. And we'll just put it just by our camera here to act as a fill light on our smoke. And we'll decrease the value of this one to something like 5,000. And this will be pretty good for our initial setup. Pretty rudimentary, but you need to have some lights hitting your smoke for it to render properly most of the time. So this is pretty good. Before we go to our shading, make sure that you are in the camera tab here using the Cycles rendering engine, and then we'll just go to the shading tab here. Now let's go ahead and select our smoke domain, and this is where we can change how our smoke and fire looks according to our simulation and our material settings here. So we'll just go to view and viewpoint camera. And now as you can see our explosion via our camera view. And now we can adjust some of the settings here, but first we'll go ahead and go forward a few frames here. I like to choose a frame where the smoke and fire are burning off a little bit so that we can get a really good shading for that moment of the explosion, because at the very beginning of the explosion it's going to be pretty explosive and pretty bright, but once the flames start burning out, that's when you get the most interesting result. So I like to shade according to that. Alright, so now we'll just press Z and we'll go to shading mode here. As you can already tell, our smoke is looking a little bit too globular here and a little bit too bright for this moment. So let's go ahead and change a few of these settings. Alright, so it took a little while to get the smoke materials right, but I found some settings that work pretty good for it. Once we're going to add some glow and glare in the compositing process, I've put the density value at 108 with the contrast of 20, and normally I don't put the contrast this high, but for whatever reason this specific bake, the smoke was cutting up the flames very nicely for this larger scale smoke look, and it worked pretty well. So yeah, that's what I tried there. Then I also played with the heat multiply node here to change the brightness of the flame, and I actually put it at 8, which is very low for this specific example, but it's looking pretty nice here as you can see. And once we add some of that compositing, it's going to look even better. I normally don't increase the contrast of the heat value very much, but by doing this we can actually change the range in which the flames are pushing through the smoke, and by increasing it to 4 I got a pretty good result. So a good rule of thumb is if your explosion is looking pretty good in this preview window, you can make it look just as good in your actual render. So just be sure to take that into account, and you can get all kinds of different looking results with changing the material settings. But I found this specific one worked for me in this specific example. And I also think the explosion is a little bit too large for this building. So one thing we might do is actually just increase the size of our building in the scene for our render. But for the sake of this tutorial, we'll just leave it as it is, and I'll show you how to composite this explosion as well. well. But anyway, let's go ahead and do a test render of this explosion before we add that debris coming out with our gasoline explosion as well. So let's go ahead and select our ground plane here, and first we're going to actually make this a glossy layer just so it looks a little bit nicer of a render, like a little glossy material. So we'll just go to the material tab here, we'll just create a new material, and we'll just change the surface to glossy, and we'll change the roughness to 0.2, and then we'll change the color to something dark just so it's a little bit more cinematic. And you can change this to whatever you want. If you want to add a city around it like I did in the beginning of this video for the example, you can definitely do that as well. Alright, so now let's do a little test render to make sure our smoke and fire are looking really good when we render it out, and composite it with some glow and glare. So let's go to layout here, and now we'll just go to view, camera, and we'll go ahead and do our test render with maybe something like 14 samples just to save a little bit of time. We'll keep our light paths the same, then we'll go under output, we'll just increase this to 100%, or maybe just 95 for this specific one. And actually, before we render it out entirely, we'll go to the layer properties tab here, and we'll just export an emission pass here as well, so we can composite everything with some glow in the compositor a little bit easier like I showed in my last video. So we'll go ahead and check that, and now we'll just go ahead and press render image, and then give your computer some time to render that image so we can see what we're getting so far. Alright, so we have rendered out our explosion here, and this is our original render. Let's go ahead and open up the compositor and see what we can do to add some glow and glare and make it a little bit more realistic. So let's go ahead and close this here, and we'll go to the compositing tab here, and make sure the use node checkbox here is selected, and this should show up here. Now we'll just go ahead and press Shift A, and we'll go ahead and output our viewer, and we'll just move our image here to the viewer. And now let's see what we can do to add some glare to this explosion in a very rudimentary way very quickly. So we'll just press Shift A, and we'll add a filter for glare, and we'll change it to fog glow, and then we'll bring down the threshold to 0.1. And as you can see here, that's already adding some glare to it, and we'll just duplicate this several more times to see what we get. And there you go, that adds some pretty nice glare to your explosion, and you can play around with the size of our fog glow and the quality as well, but you can see that it's going to look pretty cool once we composite it all together. Another thing we might do to just see what we're getting is just add a background. So we'll just go to input image, and maybe we'll just go here under viewer, we'll just go to color alpha over, put this here, and this one will go to image. And then we'll connect our image here, and then we'll find a nice background. Maybe under downloads I have something. Try something like thunderstorm. It's a nice looking background. Just flip it, and then we'll just change the size of it a little bit. We'll go to distort, scale, and then we'll change this to render size. And then now we have a cool background just temporarily to see how our glow is looking with a background sky photo. And I think it's looking pretty good. We have some nice detail in the fire here. If I were going to re-simulate this explosion, I might decrease the size of the domain cube a little bit so that we have a little bit more detail in the smoke and flames, but I think it's looking pretty good. Alright, so now let me show you how to add that concrete debris field blasting out to make the explosion a lot more realistic and interactive with your scene. So we'll go ahead and go to layout, and now what we're going to do is we'll select the domain here, and then we'll go ahead and under the physics tab we'll just turn our fluid simulation off just so we can speed up our bake a little bit more. And now our computer can run a little bit faster since we're not dealing with the heavy bake file. Alright, so let's go to frame 30 where our explosion starts, and that's where we're going to add our debris blasting out from the building as well. And then we'll go to our cursor button here, and we'll select that, and we'll select where in the building we want the debris to emit from. So we'll select right here, and make sure again we're at frame 30, and we'll go to the KHAOS tab. And we're going to deselect the smoke fire option here, and instead we'll select the concrete checkbox. And then we'll just select the omnidirectional burst operator. And now as you can see, if we scroll through it here, we have some concrete debris blasting out here. And obviously we need to change a few things, so let's do that. But it's looking pretty good right now even. We'll go to the particles panel here, and we'll change the number of concrete particles to somewhere around 950. We'll play through that again and see what we're getting. Alright, that's looking pretty cool. I think the size of our particles is not quite big enough for our scene, but it still looks pretty cool. As you can see in this concrete debris field, we have different types of concrete. We have this kind of cinder block type look, and then different kinds of bricks. They're actually all textured 3D scans, so pretty realistic, especially for a wide shot like this. They'll look pretty nice in our scene here to add to some realism. As I said before, we do need to increase the size of them a little bit, so we'll just go to the render tab here, and we'll just go to the scale option, and we'll just increase this to something like maybe 0.15, and this is looking a little bit better, I think, for our blast. If we just play through it here, that's looking pretty nice. One thing we might do is add some randomness to our scale, just to get a little bit more of a variety of small or large pieces of debris. So we'll change this to something like 0.5, and then we'll also increase the velocity a little bit to something like maybe 18, and then try it again. And as you can see here, since our building was made a collision object near the beginning of our scene, it's actually interacting with the particle debris, which is obviously much more realistic and much better for our scene. And this is looking pretty good. The debris is falling nicely, and I think it's going to look really nice in our render. So let's go ahead and go to our cache here, and we'll just go ahead and bake our debris so that it will work in our render. So as your debris field is selected, we'll just press this bake button, and now your computer is going to go through all the frames and bake the physics and particles into your scene, so it doesn't have to calculate that every time. Right, so now your particle debris is baked into your scene here. You can go to a frame of your choice. Maybe frame 44 looks pretty good here, and then we'll go ahead and select our smoke domain again and reactivate our fluid and smoke settings. And yeah, there you have it. There's a nice explosion with some debris. You can obviously free the cache of your debris field. Looking at this with the explosion, I might add a little bit more velocity to it, or even add a little bit more particles. But yeah, it's looking pretty good for the sake of this tutorial, and I hope you get the idea on how you can experiment with these things. Before we finish this video, I want to go through some output settings with you guys. So let's just go to the output tab here. Normally I will output my files with the OpenEXR file format, so we'll go ahead and select that. I usually use an alpha channel as well, and this is where you would choose your file output. So just create a new folder for your animation and export it here. I will go back to my camera tab here, and I recommend putting your render sampling at somewhere around 40 for smoke, but sometimes you can get away with less. I also recommend selecting the seed stopwatch here just for some noise variation. It helps a lot with some realism. And yeah, to export your emission pass as well, if you're going to use a third-party compositor, you would want to go here to your compositor tab, and then you would want to create a file output here, and then connect your emission pass to this file output, and then select another folder for those specific files. So that's how you would do that if you're going to composite in a third-party compositor. If you're going to composite inside of Blender, then you can use your emission pass right here and then export your composite. You could export your composite just right here at the end of all your compositing settings. I like to composite in a third-party compositor, so I'm going to leave my composite node just attached to my beauty path so that I have all those details to play around with in post-production. Anyways guys, that's it for this video. I hope it was helpful. As always, feel free to leave any comments if you have any questions or suggestions in the comment section below. We hope you like this video, and we hope you like the KHAOS add-on. I'll see you guys next time.